My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 38 years old. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago to describe my marriage, I would have used words like stable, comfortable, dépendable. I never would have imagined I'd eventually describe it as a slow-moving avalanche I didn't realize had already begun. The end of my 12-year marriage didn't arrive with screaming. There weren't shattered dishes, no dramatic affaire confession, no tears soaking through tissues while someone apologized for falling out of love. It arrived over dinner, 3 nights after my entire life changed. I found myself replaying that evening over and over, searching for signs I'd somehow missed. The smell of roasted chicken still lingered in the kitchen. The television murmured softly from the next room. Outside our dining room windows, rain tapped against the glass, in a rhythm that now feels impossible to forget. Across from me sat my husband, Nathan Parker, 35 years old. His fork barely touched his food. He let out a sigh. Not an exhausted sigh, not a worried one, a theatrical sigh, the kind designed to invite questions. I looked up. "What's wrong?" I asked. Nathan stared down at his plate before finally lifting his eyes to mine. "I can't do this anymore, Evelyn." The word settled heavily between us. I frowned. "What do you mean? This life?" He said quietly. "It's so beige." I actually laughed a little, because surely that couldn't be what he meant. But Nathan didn't smile. "I deserve better than this boring life." The room went very still. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to explain. We weren't struggling. We had a beautiful home, 2 reliable cars, retirement savings, security, routine, the kind of ordinary life people spend years trying to build. Maybe it wasn't thrilling. Maybe it wasn't glamorous. But I'd thought it was ours. "You deserve better," I repeated. His jaw tightened. "I need passion," he said. "Excitement. I'm wasting my best years. I want a divorce." There it was. Sample, clean, clinical. For one terrifying second, my chest tightened so sharply, I thought I couldn't breathe. 12 years, holiday traditions, inside jokes, promises whispered in dark bedrooms, plans for growing old together. Reduced to one declaration: I deserve better. I expected devastation. Instead, something colder arrived. Calm. Nathan wasn't crying. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't heartbroken. He looked expectant, as though he'd sent back a disappointing meal and was waiting for the restaurant manager to apologize. He expected bargaining, begging, maybe tears. "Evelyn," he prompted. I folded my hands together. "You absolutely do," I said softly. His expression flickered. Confusion. "You deserve the life you want." His eyes widened slightly. "Really?" "Of course," I answered. "Let's make that happen." For the first time that evening, Nathan looked unsettled. The next morning, while he was out, probably recounting his brave act of self-discovery to his older sister, Megan, I began helping him build the exciting future he demanded. I didn't get angry. I got organized. First, I called a family attorney highly recommended by a colleague. I explained everything. Nathan's exact words. The house. The finances. The years of marriage. The lawyer listened carefully. Then he gave me immediate instructions. Don't move out. Don't make emotional financial decisions. Document everything. I opened my laptop. If heartbreak had taught me anything, it was that truth often lives in details. And details lived in spreadsheets. I listed our assets. The house, inherited from my grandmother before our marriage. The deed solely in my name. Protected. My investment portfolio, built from inherited funds, never commingled. Protected. Then came debts. 2 joint credit cards. Years of spending. Designer purchases. Luxury treatments, girls' trips, boutique shopping sprees, expenses I'd absorbed because I believed marriage meant generosity. Total balance, $38,000. I stared at the number, then kept typing. 2 cars, my sedan, Nathan's SUV, paid off. Simple. By evening, I'd printed 3 apartment applications when Nathan walked through the front door. I was waiting at the kitchen table. "What's all this?" he asked. "I did some work today," I replied. I slid the apartment applications toward him, his eyebrows knit together. I turned my laptop around. The debt spreadsheet glowed beneath the kitchen lights. One column, highlighted, Nathan's portion, $19,000. His smile disappeared. "What is this?" "It's your fresh start." His face drained of color. Evain. "The house isn't marital property," I explained evenly. "Neither are my inherited investments. Legally speaking, they remain mine." His eyes darted across the numbers. "No, the debt is different." He looked up sharply. "This has to be a joke." I met his story. "You wanted an exciting life." "Nathan." I gently pushed the applications closer. Exciting lives cost money. For the first time since asking for a divorce, I saw fear, real fear. Not anger, not outrage, panic. The curtain had finally lifted, and somewhere beneath all his fantasies about freedom and passion, the machinery of consequences had begun to move. Nathan's lawyer called mine the very next morning. The message was polite on the surface, but the meaning underneath was obvious. Nathan had not expected the divorce to look like this. He had imagined freedom wrapped in applause. He had imagined me crying in the kitchen, asking what I could change about myself. He had not imagined apartment applications, debt division, and a legal explanation of why my grandmother's house was not his ticket to a softer landing. My attorney, David, told his attorney one thing: the only terms being discussed are the ones dictated by state law. Your client should start looking carefully at his budget. 2 weeks later, Nathan moved into the spare room at his older sister Megan's townhouse. I heard this through a mutual friend before Nathan confirmed it himself in a phone call that began with breathing so sharp it sounded like static. "You expect me to pay $19,000, he snapped. "Are you insane?" "Evain, it's half the joint credit card debt. That's financial abuse." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I opened the folder on my desk where I had already printed every statement: the handbag store, the weekend resort, the spa packages, the weekly lunches. That was your spending. Nathan, that was for us. He shot back. For our life? Our life didn't need a $400 grooming appointment every other week. His silence lasted 2 seconds too long. Then I heard Megan in the background. "Tell her she's cruel. Tell her she's punishing you." Nathan came back louder. "You can't just throw debt at me because you're bitter." "I'm not throwing anything," I said. "The legal system will divide it. You wanted out of the boring life. The exciting one is yours now." Megan grabbed the phone. "Evain, I cannot believe you." "Hello?" "Megan. After everything Nathan gave up for you, he supported your career by making that house feel like a home." I looked around the kitchen I had paid for, the house I had inherited, the silence he had left behind. What exactly did he give up? "Megan, he hasn't worked steadily in almost 10 years. He's creative. He's unemployed. You're trying to punish him for wanting happiness." "No," I said. "I'm granting his wish." Then I hung up and blocked her number. The next move came 3 days later. A call from HR. An anonymous email had been sent by a concerned friend, claiming I was unstable, overly stressed, and possibly a risk in the workplace. It was so obviously Nathan that I felt embarrassed for him. He knew my job was demanding. He knew reputation mattered. He also knew that, unlike him, I had something to lose. I sat in the HR conference room with my manager and answered calmly, "My husband and I are divorcing." I said, "He is unhappy with the financial reality of his decision. My work has not been affected, and it will not be." They reviewed my performance, my recent projects, my communication logs. Nothing supported the complaint. The matter was closed as a non-credible external claim. David loved it. Malicious behavior, he said. Documented. Beautiful. The official demand letter arrived the next day. Nathan wanted half the house value, $5,000 a month in permanent spousal support, and for me to pay his legal fees. His claim was that he had sacrificed his career potential to maintain our household and support my professional growth. I read the letter twice. Then I set it down and stared at the dining table where he'd ended our marriage because our life was too beige. David drafted a response so short, it felt almost surgical. The house was non-marital. The inherited investments were non-marital. Spousal support was rejected. Legal fees were rejected. Debt division remained on the table. For good measure, he attached the spreadsheet again. That night, Nathan broke his own lawyer's rule and texted me, "Evan, please. I have nothing. You have everything. How is that fair? I made a mistake. Let's just go back." I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. For 1 second, I remembered the man I married, the one who danced barefoot with me in our first apartment when we couldn't afford furniture, the one who once drove through a snowstorm because I had the flu and wanted soup from one specific diner. Then I remembered the man at the dinner table, cold, expectant, certain I would collapse without him. I took a screenshot, sent it to David, and did not reply, because some doors don't close. Some doors are slammed by the person standing on the other side, and when they come knocking later, you are allowed to leave them outside. The legal process dragged into its second month, and if there was one thing divorce taught me, it was this. People don't reveal who they are during celebrations. They reveal themselves when consequences arrive. Nathan still walked into every meeting carrying the confidence of someone convinced the universe owed him a softer landing. The first four-way conference with our attorneys took place on a rainy Thursday morning. He arrived 20 minutes late. He wore the same expensive watch I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. The one he'd cried over because he said it made him feel seen. Now, he barely looked at me. He sat beside his attorney, with his shoulders drawn back, his expression carefully arranged into wounded dignity, as though he were the victim in a story he'd written himself. His lawyer began. "My client devoted years of his life to maintaining the marital household. Those contributions allowed Miss Parker to advance professionally. We believe he deserves an equitable portion of all assets accumulated during the marriage." David didn't argue. He simply opened his folder. Then he slid several documents across the polished conference table. The original deed, my grandmother's estate records, financial statements, the residence, David said calmly, was inherited before the marriage and remained solely in Ms. Berde Calmus of Rose Parker's name. He pushed another document forward. The investment accounts originated from inherited funds and were never commingled. Another page. My client's retirement account is marital property. She remains prepared to divide that portion equitably. Then he folded his hands. Our position remains unchanged. Nathan actually scoffed. It was such a small sound, but somehow it said everything. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. Everyone looked at him. "I decorated that house," Nathan said. "I hosted parties there. I made it into a home." His attorney's eyes closed briefly. as if praying for patience. You can't honestly say that means nothing. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was genuine disbelief in his face, as though hanging curtains and choosing throw pillows had transformed inheritance law into sentiment, as though effort automatically translated into ownership. For a moment, sadness pierced through my anger. Because Nathan truly believed this, he had convinced himself that wanting something badly enough made it his. The meeting ended without progress. 3 hours later, his mother called. Karen Parker had always perfected guilt into an art form. Evain, she began softly. How can you do this to him? I closed my office door. Do what? You're throwing Nathan into the street with nothing. He asked for a divorce. He sacrificed everything for your marriage. I looked out the window. Employees crossed the parking lot, carrying coffee cups and laptops. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives. I didn't force him to leave our marriage. I said quietly, his financial situation is a consequence of his own choices. Karen's voice sharpened. You have so much. And Nathan spent much of what we had. Then I hung up. That evening, I stopped reacting. I stopped defending. I stopped explaining. Because I realized something important. The truth didn't need emotion. The truth needed organization. So I began what David jokingly called my masterpiece, discovery. We subpoenaed 5 years of credit card records tied to our joint accounts. Boxes of statements arrived. Digital files, transaction histories, receipts, thousands upon thousands of entries. I spent an entire weekend at my dining room table. Highlighters, sticky notes, Excel spreadsheets, coffee growing cold beside me, outside. Spring rain tapped against the windows. Inside, 12 years of marriage, transformed into numbers. I categorized every purchase above $50. Green, legitimate household expenses, groceries, utilities, medical appointments, home maintenance, necessary spending. Pink, Nathan's personal lifestyle choices, salon appointments, designer clothing boutiques, luxury skincare subscriptions, weekend trips with friends, specialty fitness memberships he abandoned months later, decorating projects involving expensive furniture he insisted we needed before selling it at massive losses because he'd grown bored. Page after page, statement after statement. At first, I expected exaggeration. Maybe I'd overestimated. Maybe grief had distorted my memory. Instead, the evidence stunned, even me. $155,000. I stared at the total until the numbers blurred. $155,000. Paid gradually, over years. Quietly absorbed because I loved him. Because partnership meant generosity. Because every time I questioned it, Nathan had smiled and promised our life was beautiful because of the details. I remembered the arguments. It's just self-care. It's for entertaining. We deserve nice things. You work hard. I had believed him. I compiled everything. Nearly 300 pages. Color-coded. Indexed. Cross-referenced. David reviewed the documents and leaned back in his chair. Evain, he said. This changes everything. Our revised proposal was devastating in its simplicity. Nathan would still receive his equitable portion of my retirement account, approximately $85,000. However, the $155,000 in documented personal spending would now be classified as an advance on his share of marital assets, money already received, money already enjoyed, money already spent. By that calculation, Nathan owed me approximately $70,000 to equalize distribution. David drafted the offer, then added one final option. We would waive the $70,000 completely. If Nathan accepted responsibility for the full $38,000 in credit card debt, and requested zero spousal support, no alimony, no additional assets, no further claims. David sent the package, 300 pages of consequences. I imagined Nathan opening it, watching his version of events collapse beneath highlighted transactions and itemized truth. 2 days later, David's phone rang. Nathan's attorney sounded exhausted. "My client feels attacked." David's response became my favorite sentence of the entire divorce. "The numbers don't feel," he said evenly. "They simply are." He paused. "It appears your client has enjoyed an exciting lifestyle for years. This is merely the invoice." For the first time since Nathan had announced he deserved better, I realized revenge wasn't fury. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't humiliation. Sometimes revenge looked like fluorescent pink highlighter. Sometimes it looked like spreadsheets. Sometimes it looked like handing someone an itemized receipt for the life they'd insisted someone else owed them, and waiting quietly for them to decide whether they wanted a judge to read it aloud. 6 months after Nathan looked across our dinner table and declared that he deserved a more exciting life, our divorce became official. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, no grand speeches, no triumphant moment where everyone finally acknowledged who had been right and who had been wrong. Real life rarely offers that kind of theater. Instead, there was paperwork, signatures, quiet acceptance, and the unmistakable sound of consequences settling into place. Faced with the possibility of a judge reviewing nearly 300 pages of meticulously documented spending, Nathan folded. He accepted the deal. He assumed responsibility for the entire $38,000 in credit card debt. He walked away with no spousal support, no claim to my house, no portion of my inherited investments, no additional assets beyond the marital retirement distribution he had already effectively consumed through legal fees and debt obligations. When David called to tell me it was finalized, I sat at my desk and simply stared out the window. "You okay?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. For months, people had expected me to be angry, vindictive, bitter. But what I felt wasn't any of those things. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm peaceful." After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea. Then I stood in the kitchen of the house I'd once believed would witness the rest of my life. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt safe. The aftermath of Nathan's new exciting life unfolded exactly as logic suggested it would. Megan's husband eventually grew tired of the constant drama filling their home, the late-night arguments, the refusal to seriously pursue employment, the endless retelling of how unfairly Nathan believed he'd been treated. Eventually, Nathan had to move out. The last I heard, he rented a modest one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat across town. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were thin. The neighborhood wasn't fashionable. The washing machines downstairs hummed through most evenings. He found work as a host at a chain restaurant, the first consistent job he'd held since shortly after our marriage began. A mutual acquaintance ran into him several weeks later. "He looks tired," she told me, gently over coffee. "Tired how, Olda?" She hesitated. "He talks about you a lot." I raised an eyebrow. "What does he say?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "He says you ruined his life." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. Even now, there was no acknowledgement of choices, no ownership, no understanding that actions produce outcomes. Some people spend their lives searching for villains because accepting responsibility feels too unbearable. Karen called one final time after the settlement papers were signed. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Nearly. "Evain." Her voice sounded older, somehow. "I hope you're happy." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Happy. You destroyed him." Outside, sunlight filtered through the backyard trees. I looked at the garden my grandmother had once loved. the roses beginning to bloom. The stone path she'd helped design decades ago. No, I said quietly. He built the bomb. Silence. Then, you really believe that? I closed my eyes. I didn't ask for the divorce. Karen, you could have helped him. I did help him. She sounded genuinely confused. What? I respected his decision. I opened my eyes again. I let him have the life he wanted. Karen didn't respond. Eventually, she whispered goodbye, then hung up. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Nathan struggle. It wasn't the debt, or the settlement, or even the spreadsheets. It was understanding something I'd missed during our marriage. Love isn't supposed to function as an unlimited line of credit. Support isn't meant to become silent sacrifice. Compassion shouldn't require abandoning common sense. 3 weeks later, I listed the house for sale. People thought I was crazy. You fought so hard to keep it. One friend said I had, but every room carried echoes. The dining room where my marriage ended, the hallway where we'd argued over vacations, the guest room, filled with abandoned decorating projects. Memories can turn beautiful spaces into museums of grief. I didn't want a museum. I wanted a future. The house sold quickly. I bought a smaller condominium downtown, bright, modern, entirely mine. While unpacking, I painted the living room a rich, dramatic blue. Nathan had always hated bold colors. It's too much, he'd say. It'll overwhelm the room. I stood in the center of my newly painted living room and laughed. Maybe I liked too much. Maybe I'd spent years shrinking pieces of myself into softer shades, because compromise had slowly transformed into permission. The blue walls reminded me every morning that I didn't have to ask anymore. The following month, I took my first solo trip. Nathan had always vetoed mountain vacations. Boring, he'd insist. Why would anyone choose hiking over luxury resorts? So I chose mountains, rugged trails, cold mornings, thin air. I climbed until my legs trembled, until sweat dampened my hair beneath my cap, until the city noise disappeared entirely. Standing at the summit, I looked across endless peaks, stretching toward the horizon. The wind tugged gently at my jacket. For the first time in years, I listened to the silence inside my own mind. No criticism, no negotiations, no explanations, just peace. I finally understood what Nathan had gotten wrong. Excitement isn't designer labels. It isn't expensive dinners. It isn't chasing constant stimulation because ordinary happiness feels insufficient. Sometimes, excitement is freedom. Sometimes excitement is discovering who you are after years of accommodating someone else's endless appetite for more. Nathan thought better meant luxury. He thought ease equaled fulfillment. He believed leaving would elevate him into a grander version of life. Instead, he discovered independence requires effort. Bills still arrive. Debt still accumulates. Consequences don't disappear simply because someone believes they deserve an exception. He didn't just lose a wife. He lost the person quietly carrying the weight he refused to acknowledge. And me, I didn't lose everything. I lost someone who mistook devotion for obligation. I lost years. Yes, I lost certainty. I lost the future I thought I'd planned, but I gained something infinitely more valuable, myself. Sometimes people ask whether I regret not fighting harder for my marriage. I always give them the same answer. You cannot save a relationship with someone determined to escape accountability. Love can survive hardship. It can survive mistakes. It can even survive disappointment. But it cannot survive entitlement disguised as self-discovery. Nathan wanted an exciting life. He got one. I simply stopped protecting him from the cost of it. And as I locked the door to my blue-walled condo each evening, returning from work to a life built on honesty rather than illusion, I realized something unexpected. The most satisfying outcome wasn't revenge. It wasn't winning. It was peace. Real peace. The kind that arrives when you stop carrying someone else's choices, the kind that allows you to finally move forward. And this time, I truly did.